this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Today I have with me Paul Comfort, an innovative transit industry leader. Paul is a Senior Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at Trapeze Group, a company that partners with transit agencies to drive operational excellence, safety, and rider satisfaction through integrated technology. Paul is a longtime industry veteran and the former CEO of one of America's top transit systems, the Maryland Transit Administration. He has also received one of the transportation industry's highest individual honors, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials President's Award. That's a mouthful, so that's good. Yes. He's also the author of the Amazon #1 bestseller, The Future of Public Transportation, and host of the world's top public transportation podcast, Transit Unplugged. So, Paul, welcome to the show, and don't critique me too hard.
Yeah. Hey, man, thanks for having me on here. As I was telling you, I was listening to a couple of your podcasts, very impressed with the caliber of guests you have. It's an honor to be here today.
No, thank you very much for taking time out for us. Let's start with some background. Tell me a little bit more about the Trapeze Group and what their mission is.
Yeah, so I joined Trapeze 5 years ago now, and Trapeze is the world's largest public transit technology company. Basically, they sell software and hardware to transit agencies, the largest transit agencies around the world. So we have, whether it's London or, LA or New York or Chicago or DC, a lot of the software that runs behind the scenes that helps transit systems, dispatch vehicles, keep track of maintenance, communicate with the public, whether it's on your phone or up on a screen, on a bus or a train. Trapeze is behind a lot of that. Clint, just recently I got to visit Dubai, which was a world, one of these got to go to the top of the world's tallest building there, the Burj Khalifa and all this stuff. But one of the cool things was there's 11,800 cabs in Dubai, and they all have a piece of Trapeze equipment inside of them. It's the mobile data terminal and all the software. So every time I got in a vehicle, I was like, hey, that's my company. So anyway, that's what we do. Yeah, we're all over the world, and it's fun to work for them. Great company with a great mission.
That's awesome. So how did you arrive at Trapeze? What's your backstory? We'll paint you like a superhero. What's your backstory?
Yeah, the backstory. Open the cape. I got started in public transportation right out of college. It's one of those, I have a book called Full Throttle, Living Life to the Max with No Regrets. And I've got a chapter in there called I Met a Guy. And it seems like every good turn in my career is all because I met a guy. I mean, it's just, I was thinking about it one day and it came to me. So I met a guy while I was 21. I was running for county commissioner in my home county, always interested in politics. Later in life, I got elected. But that time, I think the voters thought I was a little too young. But I was elected to Central Committee, but not the county commissioner. But I met a guy, and he was the head of the Department of Aging for the county. And he said, Paul, I've got 2 jobs coming open. I really like you. I think you're a great young man. Would you like the transportation job or head of the senior centers? Which one do you want? You can have one or the other. And I was like, I don't know. Which one do you think I should take? And he said, well, why don't you do the transportation job? It's a brand new thing. You can make your imprint on it. It's a brand new position. And I said, great. And so here I am, Clint, over 30 years later, still in the transit business. That's how I got started. So a little, swerved off, went to law school, became an attorney, practiced law a little bit, went into county management, was CEO of 2 county governments, one near Washington, one near Annapolis. But most of my career, 25 years or so, has been spent actually, either in business development or in managing public transportation. So as you mentioned, my penultimate job was Governor Larry Hogan here in Maryland appointed me to be head of the MTA in Baltimore, which is the transit system, the subway system that goes into Johns Hopkins, bus, the light rail that serves Camden Yards, the commuter train that goes down to Washington, D.C., to Union Station, paratransit, commuter buses, the whole works. One of the most multimodal, which is what we call in our industry, different types of modes, systems in the country, and one of the top 12 largest systems with $1 billion budget and 5,000 employees and contractors. It was a scene, and I had a blast doing it. And then when I left, after kind of hit my 30 years in the industry, I had a bunch of offers, and I went to the company that let me work from home. And so I didn't have to drive into DC or Baltimore anymore. And also they would let me kind of expand my influence on our industry, and that's what I've been doing.
I got you. Yeah, the thing about public transportation that strikes me is that you never hear about it when it's good.
That's right.
It's kind of like for those of us who love football, it's kind of like the lineman, right? If the offensive line does their job, you don't even recognize them. But boy, if they blow an assignment and the quarterback gets sacked or the running back gets hit in the backfield, it's the offensive lineman's fault, right? So public transportation, if it's going well, you don't think about it. It's only when something bad happens that we hear about it.
It's so prescient you would say that. I was just interviewing a guy earlier for my podcast today, and I told him that exact thing. The reason I call my podcast Transit Unplugged is because the only time CEOs of transit systems normally ever get in the news is if there's a derailment or a shooting or something like that, and they never get to tell the good side of what they're doing. So that's what my podcast does. It tells the good side.
Oh, that's
lets
good
them
to hear.
tell the good side. Yeah.
Good stories are always nice. So I think I read in your bio, you actually have two Amazon number one bestsellers.
Yeah, so the other one was a children's book on public transportation, Clint. When I was, my wife and I married my high school sweetheart. We've been married over 30 years. We have 6 children and 6 grandchildren. And during the peak of the pandemic, when we couldn't do anything, I wanted to write a book for children about public transit for my grandkids. And first I wanted to buy them one. I couldn't find one that kind of showed pictures of everything, buses and trains and light rail vehicles and how they all work and, an interesting but not over the top level for kids ages like 5 to 11 or something like that. So since I couldn't find one, I wrote one and it seemed to do pretty well. Went to number 1 and it was endorsed by UITP, the International Transit Association, and it's used in schools and stuff like that all over the world now. So it's a great little introductory thing for children to talk about public transportation.
And what's it called?
It's called Public Transportation from the Tom Thumb Railroad to Hyperloop and Beyond. And it's available like all my books on Amazon. Just look at Paul Comfort Transportation. Yeah. So, the title tells it all, right? So it goes from the Tom Thumb Railroad where, a horse raced a train when they first got started. That was the first thing. And the horse won because the train broke down. Classic, But that was the Tom Thumb Railroad. Eventually it became a great deal. My office in Baltimore is right next to the B&O Railroad where they started, which was our first big passenger rail here in the U.S. And then the latest thing, Elon Musk and Sir Richard Branson are working on is Hyperloop, which is an underground kind of train in a tube that can go, in theory, up to 600 miles per hour. So, from one extreme to the other. That's what the book's about. So it's fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. As a longtime leader and veteran in the public transportation industry, your career has really been centered around people. Can you start by telling us more about what drew you to this industry and what you enjoyed the most about it still today?
Yeah, you're right. It's funny. Man, you're good at this stuff. So you're right. My life has been about people. I'm a people person, and I think that'll come out through your questions today. My dad was a minister, Reverend Comfort. That really worked well for him. And I was, I played piano in church. I'm a musician and very active in our church, but I never really felt called to go, quote, in the ministry like my dad was full time. I always felt like where I could minister the most, to be honest with you, it was through government. The classic line, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." I really meant it when I said it. And that's why I ran for office when I was 21 and talked my brother into running for delegate to the General Assembly when I was 16 so I could manage his campaign and ran for office multiple times, state's attorney, finally won for county commissioner, helped others run. But I wanted to help people, and I felt like the best way to do it was through local government, to be honest with you. I think that's the government that's closest to the people. It's where the rubber hits the road. That's why my favorite jobs were county administrator, where I was, running the airport, helping the schools, the 911 center, all that stuff. You got to kind of have a hand in managing. It was fun. So how I got into transportation was just that, right? I knew I wanted to go into government. I'd lost for county commissioner, but wanted a job in local government, and that's what I got, that first one I mentioned earlier. Did that for 7 years, and have just stayed around public transportation. I feel like I've become, an expert in the theory that, if you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you're an expert, like the book Tipping Point and Blink taught us, or some of those books he wrote, Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite authors. And then, I just stayed in it. A couple times I thought about leaving the transit industry, doing the other thing, which I love full time, which is communications. I worked 16 years part-time in radio and thought about buying a radio station. So now I ended up combining it, which I think is the best way to do it, right? You combine your passions, your avocation with your vocation. And it's like, those guys have said, I never worked a day in my life because I was doing what I loved. I don't That's not my statement. Believe me, I've worked some grueling jobs, miserable, every day nose to the grindstone jobs in this industry. But now I'm at a place where I feel like I'm self-actualized and I'm able to do just what I wanted to do, which is help as many people as possible access all of life's opportunities through public mobility. We help, 50 million people a day in North America use our services in one way or another. And I'm connected, to be honest with you, with almost all of those agencies through my company software and also through my books that have, one book you mentioned, Future Public Transportation, included 40 of the world's leading experts in public transportation. I'm writing a new book on equity and inclusion in public transit that includes interviews with, over a dozen top CEOs. And I have 50 or 60 of these top CEOs of transit systems, they don't use Rolodexes anymore, but in my contacts on my phone. And I'm texting and calling them all the time, putting on live events, live CEO roundtables. I just did one last month in Texas with some of the top leaders in the industry from cities, like Austin, Texas, and New Orleans, and all these great transit agencies. So that's why I stay involved in it, because I think it's an area where I have found a niche where I can really help people improve their lives. And I think public mobility and all that really means now, which isn't just going from A to B, we can do that through public transit. So that's why I've kind of focused on that in local government.
Okay. In your bio on the Trapeze Group website, you're asked the question, what's one thing you wish the public knew about the transit industry? And I loved your answer and was hoping you could share it here today.
I don't remember what I said on that.
Okay.
In that interview,
sorry to put you on the spot.
That's all good. But I will tell you one that I think people maybe don't know right now. And that is the people that work in public transit agencies. To be honest, I'm not pulling your leg. I mean, I know I've seen behind the curtain, Dorothy, and seeing what's back. They really care about people. Most of them are motivated by a desire, just like I am, to help people. And that's why public transit agencies now have really embraced a new purpose. During the peak of the pandemic, Clint, ridership dropped dramatically, as you probably heard, 50 to 95% are ridership. And we were all about ridership. We had this, I think, a false idol to ridership personally, because it's the one thing we can't really control. Why are we measuring our number one KPI, the one thing we can't really control? And it's not really true. If you build it, they will come. That's not completely true about public transit, nor is it about anything probably. There's a lot of other factors involved. Like right now, public transit ridership is going up. And you know why? Something that we don't control, fuel prices. And so ridership is going back up because people are like, hey, at $5 a gallon, I may want to hop on the bus for $1 versus spend $15 to get to work today on gas and then parking and everything else. So, but that's my point, is that public transit is really about more than just getting people from A to B. It's about actually now improving our quality of lives in doing things like, environmental stewardship and even promoting equity and inclusion in cities. I've got a brand new book coming out of that title, as I mentioned, and it really has become more of a raison d'etre for our agencies than just transporting people from A to B. Okay.
Your best-selling book, The Future of Public Transportation, focuses on transportation and the transit industry as a whole, and how will it evolve in the coming years? What are some of the major trends, innovations in technology, and business models you forecast having the biggest impact on the future mobility options?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. So I'll give you a kind of an expansive answer and then dial in on three things that I think are the hottest trends. The expansive answer is, back in the 1970s, public transportation between the 50s and the 70s, it was largely operated by private companies, like utility companies, electric companies, right? There were an electric company in a city would put in a streetcar system, which had electric wires over top and catenary wires, and then the pantographs that would connect onto them. And you'll learn all this in my children's book and see pictures. And that's how it would drive down the street, right? And then, so the guys come back from World War II, and public transit is in its heyday, man. Everybody's riding the bus, the streetcar, light rail, whatever. And then cars become more popular in the 60s and 70s, and then by the mid 70s, ridership has declined dramatically on public transit because everybody's driving their own car now. We become a real car-centric nation in America, and so most of the private companies that operated these transit systems went belly up. They sold their assets to the government. And so cities came in, and public-private agencies, which really are quasi-governmental agencies like WMATA, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, SEPTA, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority in Philly, New York MTA. All these authorities got set up where they would run transit systems as a public entity, as a public good. And so for 40 years, we've had a monopoly on mobility in cities. The government runs the bus, the government runs the light rail, the subway. But in the last 15 years or so, there's been a lot of private actors who have come on the scene, right? Uber and Lyft and scooters and e-bikes and companies like Via and other companies that are running vans and, in addition to the taxi cabs that were already there. And so really the big change in public transit, Clint, over the last 5 years or so has been that we've decided if you can't beat them, join them. And we couldn't really beat them. They were coming in beating us at our game, to be honest with you, in a lot of ways, offering, rides, where you didn't have to walk 3 blocks in a city and stand there for 45 minutes waiting for a bus. You could have a car come pick you up at your house and be there, and you could look at it on your phone and see when it was going to get there. We didn't have a lot of that technology 15 years ago. It has developed since then. Companies like mine have made it happen, and others. But so now public transit agencies have changed their role from the provider of public transit to the aggregator of mobility services in a city. So they'll put all of the services, even like Uber and Lyft and scooters and bikes and even water, boats in the water that transport you, all on one phone app, a smartphone app, where you can plan, book, and pay for your trip all behind the scenes. So that's the big change, and it's bringing in what we call microtransit. It's bringing in potentially in the future autonomous vehicles that don't have a driver. You probably have seen and heard some about that. That's coming faster than you think. And I think also the other big change is commuter rail, the BARTs, the Long Island Railroads, the Metros in Chicago. Because people are sticking with their hybrid work schedules and not going into the offices every day downtown, those commuter rail services have not rebounded their ridership like public transit has. And so they're changing the model, and they're not just focusing on their AM and PM commuters into the city, but they're offering more midday peak service, nights and weekends to get people into the ball games and nightlife. And so they're becoming regional rail services versus just kind of commuter trains. Those are some of the hot trends happening right now.
Okay. I mean, I spent the summer in Tokyo working on the Olympic Games in the village, and we saw a lot of that. You saw the apps over there. You would have Uber and Yellow Cab on the same app. So that was always interesting.
That's right.
Then inside the village, they had Toyota autonomous shuttles that went around. So
okay. Were there no drivers in them?
No, there was somebody standing in it, but they were not driving it. So,
right.
I mean,
it's
I don't know
like
what you
they call that a safety concierge or something like that.
Yeah. But it was driving itself and it would stop, but they had somebody just as a safety net.
Yeah. And that's going away pretty soon. As I mentioned to you off air, I was in Dubai recently, and the Ahmed Barosian, the head of the Dubai Roads and Transport Authority, told me, that 2023, they're going to have vehicles on the road, no driver, no safety person, nothing. Next year, it's coming.
Wow. From my perspective, I do a lot of international travel, and one of the things I always felt that I wish we had in the U.S. was more of the trains that could take you from city to city, like they do in Europe. You go to Europe or Japan. I mean, you can get on a train. It's not as fast as a plane, but boy, it's a lot more comfortable, and it's a lot faster than a car. So I wish we had more of that. I don't know if that's called light rail, but it's really going from Chicago to. I know we have Amtrak, but I guess I'm saying I wish I could see that expanded.
High-speed rail. They're calling it high-speed rail, and we have it just starting back up in America through a company called Brightline Trains. They're doing it from Miami up to West Palm. I just was there a month ago and filmed it for my TV show. Talked to Patrick Goddard, the president. They're going to do it from L.A. to Vegas probably. They're going to go the rest of the way up to Orlando, and they want to do it at other places. And Amtrak, like you said, is trying to do it, but it's got older infrastructure and they're having to update it. I love Amtrak. I love riding the Acela train, from DC or Wilmington up to New York City or Boston. But yeah, we've got a little ways to go. It's a shame that we haven't really invested in our rail infrastructure, because you're right. It's a great way to keep cars off the road, get you there quicker, fast. Everybody's got it in Europe and Asia, but America, the great developed country, we haven't been able to get it together yet. Largely.
And I love being a passenger because you can look and see the countryside going by, and you can do that in the car, but you're supposed to be focusing on the roads.
That's right. Yeah.
In July of 2020, a New York Times article commented on the effects of the pandemic on public transportation. Quote, "This could plunge systems into a transit death spiral where cuts to service and delayed upgrades to make public transit a less convenient option for the public, which prompts further drops in ridership, causing spiraling revenue loss and service cuts until a network eventually collapses." So how has your industry shifted really to keep up with the commuter's needs? I mean, I think you kind of answered it with the app that lets the car pick you up and take you to the bus stop, but anything we missed?
Yeah, that's a great quote. Really, I've used that quote a number of times in my speeches as well. I've spoken, I think, 120 times in the last 16 months at conferences and events around the world on public transit and leadership. And that's one I've used at least a half dozen times, if not more, because it's a great motivator, right? And to be honest with you, if we're only focused on ridership, then that becomes an issue. If that's our only or main KPI, right? Because if we don't have more riders this year than last year, then why should you deserve continuing public subsidy? So one of the silver linings of the pandemic, as I mentioned, is that I think it showed us that was not a great here's what it showed us. It showed us that even when we told people, hey, no one's allowed to ride public transit unless you're, quote, an essential worker. I don't like that term because I think a lot of work is essential, but I get the gist of it, right? Unless you're working at a hospital, a pharmacy, the water plant, the electric plant, things that are required to make our society, the wheels in the bus go round and round, were also the ones that made our economy go round and round. And so even when they said no one's allowed to ride because we're afraid, fear, pandemic, which, by the way, turned out to be completely false, in my opinion, because all the studies showed from Imperial College in England that there was not substantial transmission on buses and trains. Nevertheless, ridership remained at about 50% in most cities across America. And the reason is because the essential workers, people figured out, they need public transit. They're actually the ones riding the bus to the water plant, to the electric plant, to the hospital. Like I said, our subway service in Baltimore pops up right underneath Johns Hopkins University. How do you think people get there? There's not enough parking. You got to ride the subway system. And so I think federal, the lawmakers in Washington and around the country, that helped them realize, public transit really isn't just a local priority anymore. It needs to be a national responsibility because it is what makes our economy turn. The workers in these essential jobs need public transit to get there. And if it ever goes away, our whole economy could be crushed and crumble. So, you know what they did, Clint? In this bipartisan infrastructure act, a lot of people didn't realize it, but inside of that bill, the bulk of it actually, was our 5-year annual, what we call a Public Transportation Reauthorization Act. It basically says this is how much money the U.S. federal government is going to pump into public transit, invest into it. And guess what? It increased the amount of money they put into public transit on an ongoing formula-based way, 40% on average. They decided we're going to make this a national priority. And so out of the pandemic, we have the highest levels of federal funding for transit ever. A lot of cities have been able to go fare free, meaning it's not free. Somebody has to pay for it, but it's zero fare, meaning you don't have to pay if you ride up front. You pay through some other way. And so now we have a brand new model. And public transit now, to be honest with you, Clint, we're in the best shape we've been in years because we have this brand new recognition from the federal lawmakers that we are important. And then locally, as I mentioned earlier, we have a brand new reason to exist. It's not just to take commuters in and out of the big, pretty buildings in downtown anymore. It's now about, cleaning up the environment. It's now about promoting equity, inclusion, these policy goals. City governments and county governments and states have realized, we already have a tool in our tool belt that we can use to promote policy goals that are important to us. That's what public transit is becoming now.
Okay. I see you're not very passionate about this topic at all, I've noticed.
I actually believe in it, baby.
I read your op-ed about purpose-driven employment. I love that term. And agree that if leaders are going to be successful in hiring and retaining top talent, we of course must acknowledge the generational differences in how work is perceived. Can you expand on what this means to you and share an example of how you've seen it be successful in your industry?
Yes. The public transit industry, like a lot of industries, has been affected by what they call the Great Resignation. During the pandemic, we lost a lot of folks in our technical fields, like the mechanics in the shops. A lot of them retired. They were of my era, Generation X, coming into their mid-50s after having worked 25, 30 years. And they're retired during the pandemic. A lot of drivers. So every transit agency I know is short drivers. I just interviewed the CEO of the transit system in Miami. He said he's close to 200 drivers short. The guy in Boston just told me he's 300 drivers short. Wow. So everybody needs drivers and everybody needs skilled technicians. Everyone needs people to work in their planning offices, their HR, their IT, their all. So what do we got to do? Well, I'm going to give it to you from both sides of the coin real quickly. I believe that where your passion and your abilities intersect, That's your purpose. That's a theory I've come up with, and I've written and spoke about it at commencement addresses, etc. Your passion, the things you're passionate about, you're excited about, the things that you would, do for free, so to speak, your hobbies, where that intersects with your abilities, not what your mom says you're good at. Your mom thinks you're good at everything, but what you've been recognized to be good at, whether you're good with your hands or good talking or whatever, where those two things intersect, that's your destiny, that's your purpose. So as an individual, I think people are looking, young people especially, in their, let's say, 20s and 30s and even teenagers, are looking to work in jobs that don't just pay them money and give them good benefits like maybe my generation looked for, but they also want something that energizes them because they're tied into a purpose. That's why I call it purpose-driven employment. So on the flip side, for employers, that's what we need to be focusing on when we do our employment ads and our outreaches is let's not just talk about our pay and benefits and the good hours and, the good career. Those are important, I think, but also let's talk about our higher purposes, the things I've already talked about, how the public transit is really cleaning up the environment by going all electric. Buses have always been, cleaner than a car because you're taking 40 cars off the road for every bus or more, when you have 40 people on board. But now we're even doing more than that. So why not talk about that? Why not talk about how all of our equipment is going high tech and you can get the high tech training you need for the jobs of tomorrow? Why not talk about how we're promoting equity and inclusion in communities so that people that are passionate about justice, etc., will be drawn to us. So as public transit agencies, we need to be doing that, but so can any industry, right? You can find your higher purpose and kind of channel that and understand that you're going to attract people then who aren't just there for the money and won't leave you for a quarter an hour. They're there, like a lot of people would, right? Yep. They're there now because they believe in what you're doing. And then if you can tie that in with actually what you talk about a lot on your show, Clint, which is leaders that listen and take input from people and, aren't top-down autocrats, you combine all that up and you've got a winning formula to attract people to your company or your agency.
That's a great concept. I wouldn't have thought, when I think about public transportation, I have in my head kind of an old stoic staid kind of thing. And you're talking about really freshening it up, making it more inclusive. That's awesome.
You got it.
One of the things you also talk about are the 3 C's in leaders: character, competence, and communication. Can you walk us through what makes those qualities so important?
Yeah, as I have analyzed what I've wanted in leaders, because I've spent most of my life, as I mentioned, in management. So I've always been hiring people. So I try to, like that Malcolm Gladwell book, Blink, says how we sum up people in the blink of an eye. I've tried to come up with some handy tools for me to use as I interview people and meet people along the way and say, hey, I'd like to have them come work with me. And they are these 3 C's: character, competence, and communication. Character means, in my mind, integrity. It means doing what's right when no one's looking. And I want people to work for me, and I think most people would want people to work for them that have character, that aren't going to steal from the company, right? That aren't going to be goofing off. Like I remember just telling my wife the other day, I go to a lot of public agencies and walk through their back offices as part of what I do. And I remember being in one a couple years ago, and I'm not kidding you, Clint, every person's computer screen was tuned to social media as I walked through there. They were supposed to be working. This was not lunchtime, but Facebook, Instagram, they were all up on their computer. I said, wow. So you want people who will do what's right when no one's looking, right? That character that comes. And also somebody who's willing to put their shoulder kind of to the to the workload and pull in the direction, that you want them to do. I remember when I was county administrator in Charles County, at the end of the day, 4:30, which was clock out time, sometimes just for fun, I'd go stand at the front desk and watch the employees come out at 4:31 out the door.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to go back upstairs and see who was still at their desk. And that indicated to me people who were saying, I'm not a clock watcher. I am focused on getting the task done, and I'll leave when the task I'm working on is done or at a sufficient area. And I know there's rules about, how long people can work and all that jazz, but these were people that were salaried, not hourly, and all that stuff. So anyway, the point is looking for people who will do what's right when no one's looking, have character, have integrity. And then number 2, have competence. Now here's where I break it into 2 pieces. most people get promoted to supervisory jobs from line workers. So you're in, let's use transit again. You're a mechanic in the bus shop and you do a great job turning the wrenches, putting in new transmissions. And your boss says, hey, John is a great guy. We're going to promote him. We got an opening coming up. John, we're promoting you to supervisor. Great. And they just say, he's a great mechanic. He'll know how to tell the guys to turn the wrench correctly. But they leave off the other half of the job. When you're in a supervisor position, it's not just about your technical skills anymore. Now it's about your ability to lead and manage people. And if they never train him how to do those extra skills, they're putting him out on a limb that he's going to be sawed off on eventually because he didn't say the right thing to the right person in the right way and all the things that we have to think about when we're in management now. And so anyway, we need people who have character but also have technical competence. And if they don't have it, you need to teach it to them, that management and leadership skill. And then that's the competence we're talking about. And then communication. I think every leader now needs to be a communicator. We know, just like I was listening to that podcast of yours with the guy that the guy that was a submarine commander, and he said, he went from one model of leader where you come in and the leader does most of the talking and tells everybody what to do, and everybody else's job is to listen and get it done, to a new model, which was more what we're talking about here, the ability to communicate effectively, right? You need to communicate upwards to your upline, so to speak. You need to be able to communicate outward to your customers, and you need to be able to communicate inward to your employees and hear from them. Really listen to them. When I was CEO of the MTA, I'd have town hall meetings where I really listened to our employees at each of our garages, and we would write down what they said, and then we would go back and try to do the things that they suggested to us that made sense, and then I would make sure we reported back to them in big posters on the wall that says, you said this, you asked us this question, and here's the answer, and here's what we did to follow up on it. Same kind of thing you could do with a suggestion box. We often forget that feedback loop that employees need. They put out an idea. It takes a lot of guts to raise your hand to the CEO and say, I think we ought to do this. And you're like, oh, that's a great idea. Thanks, Bobby. And then they never hear back from you. And they're like, what a jackass. He never did what I want. But if you report back and you say, hey, Bobby's idea, it didn't work because of this reason, or we are doing it, or it's an idea we'll save for later. So character, integrity, putting your shoulder to the wheel, competence, both technical and the ability to manage and lead people, and then communicate upward, outward, and inward, and make sure you don't forget the communication feedback loop.
I think that's very important. I mean, that's one of the challenges I think we have in a world of asynchronous communication where everybody does stuff through text message or posting on Slack or email. And what we lack is this conversation. So what you've kind of described is it was a conversation with a break in the middle where you took feedback and then you went away and did some stuff, but then you conversed back with, hey, by the way, we took your advice and here's what we decided to do on this. Because I think you're right. It's probably better off to not ask for somebody's opinion on things than to ask for it and then not act on it, right? That's even worse.
Or never report back to them and tell them what you did with it. Come on, man.
And maybe you think it's clear to you, right? So I opened this podcast with the George Bernard Shaw quote: "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." So maybe because in your mind you listened to the feedback and you went away and you did something with it, but so in your mind, hey, everybody knows I've done this, and they really don't because it wasn't communicated back.
That's right. That's one of the reasons, just FYI, why I started a radio station when I was at the MTA in Baltimore, the only FM radio station owned and operated by a transit agency in America, is because I wanted to have a communication tool directly to our customers that wasn't edited by Fox 45 News, where I would try to give them a little piece of information. Hey, we're going to have something happen here. It's going to require a bus bridge, and they might or might not cover it. They usually did, Fox 45. I actually had a monthly show on their TV channel, but you get the drift. I wanted to be able to communicate directly to our customers, and we pumped this smooth jazz music all day long, plus 5 to 6 updates an hour out to all of our transit stations, on our buses, everywhere. So we became, I think, a top 10 radio station in Baltimore is what I was told, by making sure that I got the communication directly to our customers. And they had a way also to get back to us. So anyway, I think that's key.
Oh, yeah. Plus you have a captive audience.
That's right. Exactly. You got it. We had 380,000 people a day ride our transit system in all the modes. And most of them, by the time I left, were listening to WTTZ FM 93.5.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're currently seeing a big push for sustainability in business, but this is something that public transportation is focused on, really, as you alluded to earlier, for a long time, before it was cool or trendy even. What are some other ways your industry is leading the charge to create meaningful impact for a better tomorrow? And I know you've kind of touched on it with some of the things, but dig into a little deeper.
I'll give you a quick answer on that. An earlier point you made was that I made, and we were both talking about, was what are the new hot trends coming out? And one of them basically is microtransit and better serving people with disabilities. That's something we haven't touched on, but I spent much of my career working on transportation under the Americans with Disabilities Act to help people with disabilities have better access. And so one of the things my company, Trapeze, has done recently is we just announced a partnership with Uber Transit. As I was saying, if you can't beat them, join them. And a lot of transit agencies now have realized, hey, I can't get drivers. It's hard for me to get drivers, but there's all these Uber drivers and Lyft drivers on the road. And how can I access them to maybe provide microtransit, mobility on demand, paratransit, people with disabilities? How can I get them in my system? I could actually use them, if somebody is what they call ambulatory, able to move around without a wheelchair. And so our company has software called Trip Broker that a transit agency has. And when you look at your screen of all your dedicated drivers, the ones in uniforms that say, MTA, they're on there, but also now can be all the Uber drivers. They're all on the screen now, and you can dispatch rides to them. And it gives the Uber drivers more work. And in other companies like Userve, a company that has come into our industry now, they're doing the same kind of thing, but they're actually training their what they call TNC, Transportation Networking Company. They're training their drivers on how to handle people with disabilities, and they do drug tests and background checks and all that. So kind of this new model that's happening is microtransit. So if you don't have enough people to justify a bus route anymore, let's say that ridership is down so low and you need to have, let's say, 20 riders an hour to make it justify having a 40-foot bus come down there. You're like, you know what? We can't justify that anymore. So we're going to move this to a route where people really want to ride. But you don't want to disenfranchise anyone. You've got 20 people. You've got maybe 7 people. Aunt Jenny still needs to go to a bridge game on Tuesday night, but there's no bus anymore. So you send the Uber driver through your app, the transit app, and they pick her up and take her there. It's a subsidized rate, and you make sure nobody gets left behind. That's the hot trend. And then when you do it with an electric vehicle or a CNG or a hydrogen vehicle, you combine all that, you got a winning solution.
No, I think that's great. So earlier I'd asked the question about, can you remember your bio that you wrote probably 5 years ago for the Trapeze Group?
Yeah.
This answer that I loved, I just looked it up, and it's we must continue to make paratransit and accessible fixed route service safe, efficient, and reliable, while also providing world-class customer service for these passengers. Transit equals mobility, and mobility equals life. And so as a father of a special needs kid, I certainly appreciated, the paratransit and the other things you're working on.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that quote. That was right after, I don't know if you remember, but there was a big flood in Houston, and the Houston transit system a couple years ago really created, and just like New Orleans did after they got on their feet, the public transit system became the lifeline for a lot of people to get around. And so mobility equals life is kind of a thing I came up with back then. Yeah. And absolutely. One of the key principles I teach about how to bend the bureaucracy toward excellence, the very first one is to create a North Star for your agency or your company so that everyone's rowing in the same direction, so to speak. You need to have some fixed point of reference for everyone. And for transit, I've always said there's a 4-point North Star: safety, efficiency, reliability, and world-class customer service. I even had coins minted with it on it that I would give out as challenge coins at the MTA. And so that's right. So those are keys. And especially when it comes to people with disabilities or people who have been disenfranchised. Sometimes in some cities, people of color who have lived in communities outside the downtown city, they get 1-hour buses, right? Every 1 hour. But us white folks who are going into our jobs, we get transit every 15 minutes. It's not fair. That's not equitable. That's what being or the bus shelters. All the shelters are in the downtown area where the white collar workers get it, but people out in the community, they get a stick in the mud. So public transit now is about creating more equity, more inclusion. People with disabilities, lower income people, the elderly, sometimes people of color who have not really been, who've kind of been disenfranchised, I would say, public transit has the ability to really change their lives, to really affect their lives. They need it. It's not just like what we call a choice rider, like, somebody who has the affordability. I can call an Uber or I can hop on the light rail vehicle. Some folks don't have the money or the resources to be able to call an Uber at a full rate or call a taxi cab at a full rate. It's going to be $28. But they can ride the bus or the microtransit vehicle that gets there for $2, or even free in some cities like Kansas City, where my friend Robbie Mackinnon has gone ride KC Freedom. So these are things that I think our industry is leading on right now. Our big industry association called the American Public Transportation Association has a whole program that transit agencies can sign on to that helps guide them along their path to using public transit as a way to improve the public good more than maybe we have in the past.
Wow. So you said you're writing a book on that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's coming out this summer.
What's it called?
Equity and Inclusion in Public Transportation.
All right.
And it's basically a series of interviews that I did with transit leaders around America mostly, one in Australia, Melbourne, talking about what they're doing right now that works to improve in their own agencies, promotional purposes, hiring purposes, et cetera, but also in their cities, using transit as a tool to promote more equity and inclusion. I think it's cool, and it's something that we ought to be focused on in a bigger way than maybe we have in the past.
I'll look forward to reading that one then. So what's the legacy you want to leave in your industry as a leader in public transit?
I think a twofold one, I would say. One is personal. I'm a connector. I think inductively. My wife thinks deductively, right? She breaks everything apart and analyzes it. She loves playing Wordle every day and all that. And she's got me into it a little bit now. But I think inductively. I like to pull things in and create and think in my mind in trends. And I like to connect people. I'm always, she'll be like, "Why'd you say Daniel?" I said, "Oh, because I saw a sign for a Cracker Barrel, and our son Daniel used to manage there, and it made me think about him and where he's going tomorrow." And so I'm always connecting everything together. So all that to say, I have tried to connect and empower people that worked with me over the years. So one thing I'd like to be remembered for is that I help people kind of blossom into their jobs by allowing them to fully, I delegated fully to them, gave them the boundaries and the goals, and let them use their God-given creativity to get there. And we've had some amazing things. And we started something called County Stat in county government, one of the first, counties in America to create KPIs, computerized, and goals, so that the ambulance department was measuring how long does it take us to get to the scene of an accident. We want to be there 8 minutes, 92% of the time, and that's how they measure. So those ideas came from people that I was talking to, and that our staff, and so all that. So allowing people to blossom and connecting people to jobs, helping them get career moves and changes in their jobs, and the personal interaction I've had with them. And then on the bigger side, connecting people to all of life's opportunities. One of the great things at Trapeze and our parent company, Modaxo, which I'm actually going to officially start working with this next month, which is our global kind of parent company, has allowed me to do is, work in Switzerland and Australia and United Kingdom and all over the Americas with transit leaders and transit agencies, giving them kind of the ideas that I've just talked to you about, Clint, sharing best practices and helping improve. I remember sitting down one time with a transit leader, a CEO who had just worked on some new maps. And he said, "You know what, since you're here, take a look at these. Let me know what you think about them." I'm like a free consultant that comes in and helps bring in the best ideas that I get from other people. Some of them I think of myself, and then share them. And then I'm a transit evangelist. So I want to be known as somebody who promoted the idea of public transit, like I've hopefully done to you today and made you a convert, to see the value of what we do.
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, as I said earlier, as a person who travels the globe, public transit is the way to go. I mean, I enjoy the fact that as you get older, that you no longer care about going from point A to point B the fastest necessarily. It's more about what's the best way to get there, what's going to allow me to do something else like read or work. And so I'm a big fan of public transportation for sure.
Yeah.
Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide you day to day?
Yeah, I'd say the golden rule. I'm a people person, and I feel like, you need to treat others the way you want to be treated. I feel like we need to love other people. My life is motivated by love of others, the Good Samaritan and all that stuff, trying to help everyone, people that are really in need, and people maybe who aren't in need or don't know they're in need. And then I think the other big one from Stephen Covey that I always try to remember is begin with the end in mind. You need to know where it is you want to go, or you'll be like, Alice in Wonderland when she went to the Cheshire Cat at the split in the road and she said, "Which way should I go?" And the cat said, "Well, where are you headed?" She said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, then either road will do." And so if you want to get to where you're going, you need to know where it is you want to go. And then that'll help guide your decisions along the way.
That's awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
My dad, when he told me, "Don't get married yet. You got to get a job and a house, Paul." I married my high school sweetheart, Lisa, and as soon as she graduated from high school, I was 3 years older than her, 3.5, so I just graduated from college, and I was like, I'm ready to get married. And my dad was like, what are you going to live on? Love? This is not a Sonny and Cher song. You need to get your job locked down, and you need to get a place to live. And I think it'll all work out. Well, I waited 5 months, and it was probably the wisest decision I ever made, because in those 5 months, I got a job. I saved up enough money to put a down payment on a house, so we didn't have to move into an apartment. We could move into a house that we bought right off the bat, and it got us started off, even though, we didn't have all of our furniture was hand-me-downs and what other people gave us and all that. But waiting those 5 months until I was really ready was probably the best advice I've ever been given.
That's awesome. Nowadays you can furnish your house on Nextdoor, right? People are giving stuff away.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, you had to go get that orange comb. Became I think about the Jeff Foxworthy jokes, and the two center blocks and the board was an entertainment center.
That's right.
And now they're giving that away.
That's the way my house looked to start, I think. Yeah, something like that.
And now they're giving that away on Nextdoor for free. So, a nice entertainment center. All right. One last question. What is the best book or article you've read recently? And what was the key takeaway?
So for some reason, I get fully engaged in people. So last year, the last 2 years prior to this year was all about Johnny Cash. Everything Johnny Cash. I read everything I could get on him. I visited and played his piano in his museum and did all the stuff Johnny Cash, a true American icon. The last year, it's all been about Anthony Bourdain. Everything Bourdain. I've read his books. I've read books about him. And because, as I mentioned to you off the air, we've started a new TV show, Transit Unplugged TV on YouTube. And I wanted it to be like an Anthony Bourdain style show where we would dive into the culture of a city, look at its food. But I don't interview chefs. I interview transit leaders. And so it's fun. It's on YouTube. If you look it up, Transit Unplugged TV. The latest episodes are really good because I've hired a professional film director and a crew, and it's actually, the first few were like volunteer. My friends who run Nashville and Las Vegas said, "Yeah, we'll help you film it," and all like that. And they did great jobs. But now we've got a professional film crew, and so anyway, that's my latest books is. And the takeaway is, I think is that people loved Anthony Bourdain because he was authentic, and he was really himself, and he was passionate about something. His passion started out as cooking, then it ended up being travel, and then it ended up being kind of shining a light on other cultures. And I'm passionate about public transportation and about the good it can do in communities. And I think I'm authentic, I'm credible, like he was a chef, right? So I've been a transit leader in public and private sector. And so anyway, we're trying to put all that together on a TV show and trying to make it a little better each month. Once a month, we do a new half-hour episode. That's awesome. Let's kind of tie all that together. So you have your YouTube show you just mentioned. You've got your podcast. Let's talk about that. Right. What's that one called? Yeah, Transit Unplugged. It's the same basic name, Transit Unplugged TV, Transit Unplugged. It's heard in 100 countries. It is considered one of the top. It's been awarded and all that stuff. 5 years now. We've had over 200 episodes out there. It's a weekly show. It drops on Wednesdays. It's a half-hour show, and it's interviews with CEOs and news about public transit. Okay. And then, of course, you're a prolific author, so we can obviously find those on Amazon. That's right. One of the things I always tell people to do, if you have an author that has multiple books, just go to the Amazon and go to their author page, and it'll list all the different books that you can get from them. Yep. And then, so if somebody wants to reach out to you, I know you said you do a lot of speaking engagements. If they want to reach out to you or connect with you, how can they do that? So send me an email, paul.comfort@trapezegroup.com, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm the king of LinkedIn for the transit industry. I've got 21,000 followers and people I'm LinkedIn with, Paul Comfort. Or you can go to my website, futureofpublictransportation.com. futureofpublictransportation.com.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Paul. Thanks so much for the conversation.
It was an honor to be with you, Clint.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.